TruTalks, welcome to the show.
Bradley, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. You got some really good stuff going on. So, in your bio on TikTok, it says we're all living in the Truman Show. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the world is the way the world really works and exists is not the way that the majority of people perceive it to exist. Much like in the Truman Show, where Truman is living in this world he believes is authentic, when in reality almost everything around him, actually everything around him, is fabricated, is fake. So I think maybe the world that we live in is functions in a similar way.
I definitely agree with that. And when I first saw that movie, it's like one of my favorite movies now because with movies like that, you watch it and you can connect it to real life. But I
Definitely.
think Jim Carrey was probably the best actor they could have picked for that because Jim Carrey is like I don't know if you've seen the interviews with him on like Jimmy Kimmel show or
Hmm.
some other places, but he openly will talk about spirituality, will openly talk about the stuff Hollywood is doing behind the scenes. And there's a lot of people like us, for example, we can look at that and be like, he's trying to expose it, but then there's other
Hmm.
people who look at that and they just laugh at him for saying stuff like that.
Right, right. I think Jim Carrey, it's tough because, I sort of have like this view that every Hollywood celebrity is probably a part of whatever they're working on to some extent. But there are some celebrities who just seem to go against the grain. And Jim Carrey definitely seems to be one of those people who's actually trying to speak up for probably all the things he's learned through that journey that are, suppressed by Hollywood, things they don't want us to know, like the power of the mind, like spirituality. And yeah, I've heard him give a couple of speeches as well, like college graduation speeches, where you can tell he has a lot of passion for like telling people that it's all about manifestation and in that sense, just like believing in yourself, um, and being the driving force behind making what you want happen.
Yeah, and I think it's great for someone of his status and his level to do that because most people in Hollywood aren't saying anything along the lines of that. It's in terms of music, you have the devil worshipping stuff and all that type of stuff, and it's not really stuff that people can apply to their lives, and it's not positive stuff. And another thing is one of the my favorite quotes from Jim Carrey is he who was saying how he wishes that everybody could have his level of fame and status so that they could realize that that is not the meaning of life.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great one, and I feel like that's something I have deeply grained into my own mind is like never seek fame or fortune, never seek the material to try to bring meaning to your life because, like, I don't know, I think, like you said, Hollywood as a whole, they're not so much like not teaching you spirituality and like holding it back. They're just putting, you know, other things as a priority, like money and rapping about like, chains and going to the club and things that are not really that healthy when we look at them from the perspective of like what adds value to our life. So yeah, I think it's good to see people like Jim Carrey doing that. I think it's quite likely he was cast for that role because part of his mission is to probably expose, assuming he's doing what's best for everyone, which I think he might be, that the world is, in fact, the Truman Show, and that a lot of what we see in Hollywood is just a distortion of the truth, so that when we consume it in the form of entertainment, we, we don't perceive it to be possible as true. It's just from that point on, it's just entertainment, just a movie, it's just science fiction. But I think there's a lot of parallels to Hollywood and what's possible in real life.
Definitely. There's a lot of stuff they'll put in front of our faces and then,
Hmm.
we just don't acknowledge it. But before we go any further, in case people don't know who you are, you want to break down kind of the content you put out?
Yeah, sure. So primarily on TikTok, I also do YouTube, Instagram, but TikTok's my main spot. Making content, along the lines of spirituality, self-development, and more recently looking into certain conspiracies, and then kind of going down that path. CIA declassified documents. I've been building a series on that, showing off just different documents that they've released as a result of the Freedom of Information Act, and just trying to show that a lot of these documents, they hold a lot of crazy information that it's never going to be put in mainstream media, but it's all there on the internet. So that's what I've been kind of basing my channel around, trying to find new information that can be shared with people online.
And it's a great thing you're doing. So I want to talk a little bit before we're definitely going to get into the declassification and the CIA documents, but before that, I want to talk a little bit about human consciousness. Just the concept that we are able to be aware of our five senses, and with some of the stuff we'll get into later, there's kind of stuff beyond what we think is our reality here. But what's your take on just the human experience?
Man, I mean, I feel like it's constantly evolving. Like my take on the human experience, on me, on the self, it's like what it was 6 months ago is different than what it is now, and I know that what it is now will be different in 6 months from now. But I think that's the understanding, is that like anytime you feel you are complete, you that is probably the ego, because the ego wants to have purpose and meaning, whereas the self does inherently have meaning and it doesn't need to seek it. So I think, kind of trying to find my way back to your question, I think my perception of what this reality is it's a learning experience. We come to this three-dimensional place where we can experience pain and suffering and positivity and love and everything in between, so that we can evolve our consciousness, but also just there's no finish line. I think it's really just a continuous journey of discovering more and more levels of yourself, and then equally more and more levels of what there is to be known about the universe or the multiverse.
Have you heard about like concepts such as, some people believe that we're going throughout our lives and we already have like a destined purpose, and it's like up to us to discover it, and if we don't in this lifetime, then we're going to be reincarnated and to do it over and over and over again until we get to that place?
Yeah, the concept of destiny is a difficult one for me. I mean, there's few questions that are higher on the list for me, that I try to seek answer to. Free will, fate, right? Which one is it? I think, currently where I sit on that is that quite possibly you are the greatest architect of your life, meaning that there isn't just this one version of you that exists, but an infinite amount of versions of you. And what we perceive to be guidance from above, right? Something that would be aligning us, something above us, right? The hand of fate. I believe that if that exists, and sometimes it really appears to, that actually is you, higher self, the higher version of you, existing somewhere else in infinity. Knowing that experience is essential for you to become the version of you that you are in the future, or in another life or whatever. So I believe that fate exists to that extent. I don't necessarily believe our paths are predetermined from the start. I think the magic of the universe works in a way where if point A is here and point B is here, and these are these are the fate spots that we need to end up. We need to have this one experience, and we need to have this one experience. There's a multitude of possible routes that lead you from here to here. And so we have free will, I think, in those actions, and by placing consciousness in our day, we can act upon free will. But I do think there are certain things that are meant to happen to a certain extent.
Right. Well, there's
What about you?
also well, there's also what I think about is there's the biological aspects of like we're wired in certain respects like not act a certain way, but there's certain things in our programming in our subconscious mind that are just like there and they affect us. They affect the way we think, the way we act, what we feel, and we're just not conscious of it.
Hmm.
So in terms of, like I think about the movie The Matrix and Neo when Morpheus asks him I don't remember what he asked him, but it had something to do with free will, and I think he said, "Do you believe in like fate or free will?" Something along the lines of that. And Neo was like, "Free will. I don't like the concept of not being in control of my own life," and I'd say that I'm on point with that. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely like there's always things going on in the background that we're not aware of, but they affect us.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that the majority of our existence comes from the subconscious. Um, your subconscious is processing all this information every second, and your conscious is just a tiny percentage of that perception. That your consciousness observes 1/100th of a percentage of what's actually being created around you, which is everything at all times. So yeah, I think that because that's the way that we create reality to a certain extent. What your beliefs are, your subconscious beliefs, and what your biological preconditioning is, that will no doubt have an effect on the way you create reality. Because if you were taught by your parents, or you had biological, you're more likely due to your genetics to be alcoholic or something like that. Then when you go throughout life and grow up, unless you identify that there's beliefs in your subconscious that are going to probably justify you to in some way become an alcoholic, unless you change those beliefs and become conscious of them, they will start to reflect in reality, where you'll start creating experiences that feel outside of your control, but really you're manifesting them because your subconscious beliefs uh, create reality. So yeah, I definitely agree with you that there's a lot we're not aware of. And as a society, I think people just that is where we're at right now. People need to recognize that, you know, it's just consciousness that we're missing, because society and technology and media and social media specifically has put us so far into the subconscious that we're basically running on routines. And we need to start placing consciousness in our day more and more so that we can become the creator rather than being created for.
And something that we all need to become more aware of is that we have the subconscious mind. We have things going on in the background. Because so I think so many of us don't acknowledge it, and for a long time I didn't either. Because until you realize that there's stuff going on in your subconscious mind, there's no chance of you changing it or becoming aware of it. And Dr. Bruce Lipton is a doctor I listen to about the different differentiating between like the conscious and unconscious mind. And the example he gives is your conscious mind is you, let's say, going to a new place. You have to drive there. It's 15 minutes away. You put it in your GPS, and when you're driving, you're like conscious of the turns you're making, which road you're going on, so that in the future you can remember and you won't need the GPS anymore. That's the conscious mind. You're very aware of what you're doing. But let's say every Sunday you go to the exact same grocery store. The subconscious mind is you leaving your house, getting in your car, driving there, getting there, and if you think back on the past 15 minutes that you used to drove there, you won't even like remember what turns you were making, everything, because it's programmed in you. You know how
Mm-hmm.
to do it. So your conscious mind doesn't have to pay so much attention to it. So
Right.
that's kind of a neat way of explaining it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's crazy about that too is like, I think the prevailing belief is that, like, oh well, when that happens, everything that's happening around us is just reality. Like reality just exists already, no matter whether we're conscious of it or not. And that's not really true though, I think, because when you're driving and you're just zoned out, or thinking about something else, not paying attention, totally subconscious, your subconscious is also creating the cars around you, right? And the roads and the streets, because that's what it's seen before so many times. Yes, it's physically there, but I think the argument could be made that it is only physically there because your subconscious has projected it there, because that it knows that's what it's going to experience. And I think in that way we sort of all create reality. Um, yes, things are built and physical structures exist, but equally, like, we are manifesting them into existence subconsciously, because we're, you know, I think, this is another conversation, but I think in a large part when you have a society, people who are functioning from their subconscious, we also need to look at, okay, well, what's being put into their subconscious? And that's where the other conversation comes in, which I'm sure we'll get to, of like, okay, well, what's being put into our subconsciouses? Is it intentionally hurtful? And I think the answer could be yes.
Yeah, and a lot of it is programmed control and to keep things in order in a society. And when I think about all the stuff of like the way our society works, like to a degree, like I guess it can make sense that they're trying to keep people in order and like have all these laws and stuff to not have everything go completely
Hold
out of
on.
control. No, you're good. To
There
have
you
things
go.
not go completely out of control, but at the same time, the way they're doing it is limiting all of our human potential.
Definitely. And maybe that's maybe that's been something that was purposefully intended, because I think a lot of the secrets that you can look through in religious texts or just different um, you know projects, even the CIA documents, studies that happened just 100 years ago, you can find a lot of evidence that there's people in power who are in these powerful organizations, who are well aware of the power of the human mind. Um, they've showed us, I think, in these CIA documents that they've scratched the surface. They've released the stuff about telekinesis, moving things with your mind, telepathy, talking to people using electronic frequencies, electromagnetic frequencies. Um, they've exposed astral projection, moving your spirit outside of your physical body, and remote viewing, which is being able to accomplish certain tasks when you're outside of your body. And so, seeing as they've studied this stuff for 100 years plus, and seeing as it's also been written about for 1,000 years plus, seems to me that like information, it's not the information we're lacking, it's the fact that it's not being programmed into people's subconscious. We're not being educated that this is the way our bodies and our minds actually function. And most importantly, I think we're not being educated that our mind might actually be the source of everything, including our body, including reality. And so it confuses me sometimes, because it's like, how do we have millions of people, hundreds of millions in scientific communities, um, studying different topics, and this information hasn't made its way. It just doesn't seem that seems that it's probably not making its way to the mainstream on purpose, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things they might do to stop that information from getting there because they also want. I mean, of course, they don't want to cause a panic and stuff like that. But also, when you talk about stuff like telekinesis and stuff, most people aren't even going to believe that.
Right,
But
and that's why they put it online, I think, because they know no one's going to go read these documents that are dozens of pages long. And if people don't read them, but they see videos like mine, most people aren't going to believe it. Some guy on TikTok or some guy from the internet. So, yeah, I mean, it goes back to the same thing you said. People if they have subconscious beliefs that the Earth is the center of the universe, that there's no aliens, that the government can be trusted, all these things, right? Then no matter how much evidence you show them at this point, if they're completely subconscious, they don't even have the consciousness to observe that they need to to change their beliefs, to look at this evidence objectively. It's just an overwhelming amount of bias coming from an overwhelming amount of subconscious.
yeah, and like I've I don't 100% know if this is true, but I've just heard things as such as there was a certain scientist or someone who found a way to have vehicles like cars run on a fuel source of water.
Hmm?
And I mean, if that is real and that became the new norm, then all the money they're making off of oil and all that stuff that would go out the window. So if he disappeared for a certain reason, it makes sense why they did it because
Right.
they don't want things to change. Um, and I remember we were talking about it before in terms of I forgot where I was going with this.
I
In
think,
terms of
yeah, go ahead.
in terms of like time and the stuff that's being released, like for example AI. I saw yesterday that there's a flying bike. Like if you see in a movie like a futuristic flying bike, that's real now.
Is
So
that
it's
right?
like apparently it's going for $777,000 for one of them. Um,
Wow.
but something like that, like you wouldn't think that existed. And you were telling me before about how there's a potential that maybe like these inventions have already been invented. They just none of them have been released to the public until they decide they want to.
Right. I think that's one of my, you know, well, something I believe strongly is that our perception of where technology is at as a whole is at least 50 years, probably more, behind where technology is actually at. So blockchain, we're seeing it now. Let's say we saw it for the first time in 2009 with Bitcoin, 2008, maybe it was a little earlier than that. I think it was around 2010 though. So blockchain was created in 1981 by David Schwartz. That was 30, 31, 29, whatever years, since it was actually created. So the patent was filed 30 years ago, but we see it mainstream in 2010, and it's still not even really mainstream. I think less than I don't want to say the number, but I don't think it's more than 20% of people worldwide are investing in cryptocurrency yet. So it's not mainstream. Obviously, even before the patent was filed, they were working on blockchain technology, but I think that just goes to show that they work on these projects. They classify them. They know their problems. They want, in the payment space, they want to find ways to make payments cheaper, and they want to make them quicker. And so they had that same problem in 1980, 1970, same problem. So they worked on it for decades until they found a solution. But finding the solution is only half the problem for them, because then they have to find a way to make it work on a mainstream level, whether it's with blockchain or whether it's with artificial intelligence or whether it's like Facebook trying to make living in the metaverse mainstream, which they're very clearly going to try to do. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think, just all in all, it's like we don't really know where technology is at this point. They could have things that are so mind blowing that if they just unveiled them to the public, we would think it's from another planet. um,
Yeah.
but they certainly, I think, have an agenda of how they're going to roll out this technology and what technologies we're going to see in the next decade become a part of our daily lives as consumers.
I also think about certain things I've heard about ancient Egypt and the pyramids and all that stuff and the measurements and the math on that stuff and all the different things that we think we know that went on then and how that was built and all the things around that time and stuff like that. It raises the question of, it seems like there were more advanced beings for like if there were like we might believe humans in that time were doing all that stuff. And maybe they were. Maybe at that time they were more intelligent, but that would mean they were more intelligent then as a whole, and now we're dumber. So what
Mm-hmm.
would have happened there? So there's a possibility it could have been humans, and there's a possibility that could have been some other species, some other life form.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult to understand how people like can find a way to see uh, ancient Egypt as just man-made human structures, no extraterrestrial intervention there. Then they can see religious texts and be have no problem being like, yeah, that's fine. This guy just developed the ability to do things that were not human. Um, it's interesting. I think it all comes back to the way we consume information, and the way we consumed information about ancient Egypt and other places with really really long histories that are not really fully uncovered is we were taught about them, as there was no intervention with extraterrestrials, and as like specifically with the pyramids, I think it's like there's a lot of evidence there that it wasn't possible to build those pyramids for humans, no matter how much uh, like manpower they had. They either had advanced technology beyond what we have now, like you said, or it was just they had some sort of other beings there, possibly the beings they worshipped, who had supernatural powers. Um, I think that it's really hard to look back and think that they just did that all by themselves. At the very least, it was some sort of technology that we didn't have. But it is also interesting to think, if that's true, if it was another type of technology or another being or whatever, why, how did we get here, right? Kind of like what you said. How did we go backwards? And, you know, is that technology they had still around, and is it just being used by people behind the scenes, or are they trying to recreate the technology that was had back then? We don't know, right? Because we're still taught that ancient Egypt has nothing special about it.
Yeah, and it's also interesting when you think about something like the Illuminati, which is talked about as a conspiracy theory. And I mean, we know the term conspiracy theory was literally created. It was either by the FBI or the CIA to discredit
Right.
people from talking about stuff like that, and so everyone and it worked to a degree because some people you talk to
Definitely.
and you'll say talk about a certain topic that's labeled as a conspiracy theory, and they'll go, "Oh, he's just a conspiracy theorist. He doesn't know what he's talking about." And so, in
Hmm.
a sense, them creating it, it worked.
Yeah, they've been very successful, uh, CIA and a lot of intelligence agencies at creating, you know, propaganda, creating subliminal messaging techniques, and just finding ways to distort people's perception of the truth, with whether that's with misinformation or with no information at all, or there's also a lot of evidence of the CIA working with Hollywood. If you've looked into Dr. Stephen Greer, he's done several documentaries with former CIA whistleblowers, where they say very clearly that they would pay Hollywood directors to implement certain ideas into their scripts about aliens, about other topics. I'm not exactly sure what else other than aliens, so I don't want to say, but it's probably not too hard to look into those movies and see the messaging once you have become conscious of what they were actually doing. Especially with certain Marvel movies where they're kind of hinting at these advanced soldier projects. Like Captain America is a really interesting one. Sorry to tangent off, but you know it's quite clear that they were actually working on projects to try to make a superhuman person, much like Captain America. And so it makes you wonder, like, put all those pieces together. When we watch Captain America, what is our resulting belief? It is that it is a movie. It is that he is a superhero. He is not human. And they make several efforts in all those movies to say things like, I think Spider-Man has a specific quote where he says to Ned, when Tom Holland is Spider-Man, he says, "Our physiologies are slightly different." And physiology is just a fancy word that we use to describe psychology and something we don't really understand about it. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But ultimately, I think they're putting all that in those movies, saying things like that, so that when we consume them, we're not conscious of what we're consuming, and they're trying to make us further believe that those things are far away from what's happening in reality. Superheroes in reality are, they're different, but in reality, they're not. Maybe we're working on projects that are exactly the same. Maybe the story's 100% accurate. So yeah, sorry to tangent there, but I'll let you take over.
No, and I mean, I can't bring up anything specific because I can't bring it off the top of my head. I'd have to do more research. But I've heard things about in the time of World War II, like Nazis in Antarctica and stuff like that. And there's a whole like what's the whole thing of like what's going on in Antarctica because I mean we know they have like bases there doing research and stuff like that on what I don't know. And there's so many different theories of there's things as far as like the hollow earth theory where like in Antarctica there's like either a portal or a gateway or some way to reach farther into the earth and there's actually life there and it's not just what we're taught in school. It's we have just the surface where we are and then everything under is just rock and this and that until it's the core and that's it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different beliefs associated with it. None of them. So touching on the CIA side, like, have looked into some of the explorations they've done. There's a chronological, order document where they show all the different expeditions that were happening, not just from American troops, but or teams, right? But they were working with other countries on this, which became evident when they signed the Antarctic Treaty in 1961, which which is still very confusing to me to this day because in a world where we're willing to kill millions of people over fights and wars for natural resources or land or territory or just simply power, and we're not willing to take diplomatic efforts. It's like how is every country in the world and every major country in the world able to reach an agreement to hide from all their civilians what's going on in Antarctica? It must have been something quite, something they could all agree on. Okay, this would disrupt the way our society functions. So whether it's hollow Earth, whether it's further land and the Earth is actually flat or much larger than we're being told, I don't think either of those possibilities are unrealistic. And I think there's probably a lot more possibilities, like discovering abundance of some sort of new natural resource or a new element that changes the way we perceive science and physics to function, or the fossils of an animal that people didn't know existed, or a living animal that people didn't know. I mean, the list could go on for so long, but I like to believe that it's probably a collection of things, because one thing that is most strange about the Antarctica, chronological order document is that right after the Antarctic Treaty was signed, the CIA and a couple other intelligence agencies together worked to have tens of thousands of maps removed from distribution, from being placed out into the world, from being put in education. So it's strange to me that they signed this treaty and then they removed all the maps. And I think that begs the question: maybe Antarctica doesn't look like we're being told it looks like, or maybe it's much larger. Maybe it's not all ice. Because again, I don't think you've been there, and I haven't, and I think most people have to ask themselves, like, why do I believe it looks the way it does? Have I been there? No? Okay, then I don't know, because it's all been told to me from somewhere else.
Right. And
But
yeah,
it is a great question.
yeah. And like I've seen people like do video, like one guy there's a YouTube channel called Yes Theory, and they had some guy go to Antarctica and run I think it was either, it might have been an Ironman or less, or maybe it was just a marathon, whatever it was. But maybe there's the Antarctica that we're taught and that exists, but then you go farther and farther, and there's more of
Right.
something else. And some I mean, this might sound like weird, but this is just like something I've thought about. Is like we're taught like we have a map of the world. It shows the Northeast to whatever Asia, all the different places and regions, and then like on a flat map, and then you have the globe where it's like it has everything pointed out. And I just thought to myself, I was like, what if all of that does exist, but what if the whole, if assuming the Earth is round, what if like that's like all of that we're seeing is half the Earth, and like the other side could be something completely different that none of us have ever been to or know exists.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I have been resistant to become a flat earther just because like I know I'm already pretty off the rails being a UFO guy, being I have no doubt about the Illuminati, certain things, but um when I have looked into flat earth, what I've found is like that it's not necessarily this idea that the earth is flat for sure, but more so that the size of the earth, or the size of this plane or sphere or whatever we're existing on, right, is much larger than we're being told. Because when you look at certain flight patterns, it shows that it doesn't make sense for a plane going from point A to point B across the world to stop at point C. It just like the math doesn't add up for all these different flights. But if you mapped it out as if it was stretched 10 times, these countries start to distort in a way where it's like, oh, that's actually right there in the same line, and that's why they go there. And then you go a little deeper down the rabbit hole, and you realize pilots, there's a community of pilots who just say, yeah, there's no curvature. The Earth is either flat or it's 100 times bigger than we're told. And then the last piece on that is like, you actually do the math. And there's a guy I love on TikTok. He does the math for all these flights, and he shows like, okay, one I remembered for this was, he says, going to New York, from New York to San Diego, if you fly there, given the time of the flight, the size of the Earth, and uh, a few other mathematical things he uses, that you should be accounting for, I think it's 2 to 3 feet of curvature every minute, which accounts for like, a couple 100 feet of curvature, maybe more over the whole flight. And so then you have to ask yourself, like, when you're flying from San Diego to New York, which I've done plenty of times, like, is the pilot dipping the nose, 2 or 3 feet every minute, or like, 20 feet every 30 minutes, or whatever it is? Like, it just, it's hard to see that. It's hard to look at that from like, your own two eyes and be like, wait a second, like, look out the plane windows, the earth doesn't, you don't see it curving. You don't feel the nose diving to account for curvature. So I don't know. Again, I'm not a flat earther, but it certainly doesn't seem like we've been told the truth about a lot of things, and I don't think it's too far out to just assume we've been lied to about the size, the size or shape of the Earth, or all what all the land is that exists on this planet. There might be a lot more, like you said.
Right. And that would be, if that's true, that would be insane. Like we already have all these different countries and this different land, but imagine there was so much more. And that could be like other species living there, animals we haven't discovered, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think I've seen a couple maps of like this kind of, it's probably just a concept, but of like what the Earth would look like if space didn't exist, and if Earth as we know it is actually a dome. And it's all these lands outside of Earth, like the lands of Neptune, the lands of Jupiter, and these planets are actually like land masses where civilizations live. And then what we see in the sky and in space is not real. It's placed on this firmament or dome. That's sort of the belief that I think. I don't believe it fully, but I could get behind it, just because it makes sense. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but I guess I do think that would, the reason probably I haven't fully accepted or believed that is because, like you said, really it changes everything about what we know about the world and the universe. So if there is more, it's probably one of the greatest secrets that's being hidden from us. And it probably would cause a panic. So maybe for right reason.
Yeah, and the dome aspect goes back to the Truman Show. I mean, towards the end of the movie, you see like he's traveling the sea, and he gets to the end, and it's just a door to leave out, and it's like everything is the sky, it's all there, but it's not actually real. But
Right.
moving on, you've had some UFO experiences.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want
Um,
to walk us through some of those?
yeah. So, man. Well, I guess like kind of long story short, I have had two UFO interactions. The first one was quite scary. The second one was quite enlightening. Um, to tell the first story very quickly, because it could be a much longer story. I just saw some lights in the sky when I was walking my dog, and I felt this tingling in my head to continue looking at these lights, and it became very clear that what I was looking at after about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, was some sort of craft that was transparent. You couldn't see the surfaces of it, but you could just see the lights on the side of it. So I freaked out, got my ex-girlfriend at the time, girlfriend, my sister, drove into the desert thinking in my head, this is a UFO invasion. We need to get the hell out of here. Like, we packed bags and everything. And then when we get to the desert, that same feeling came over me, tingles and intuition, and like they kind of showed themselves off to us, all three of us. And I realized there wasn't any reason to be afraid, but that was the first experience. It happened right before I graduated college, and at that time I hadn't really opened my eyes, my third eye, to anything of the stuff of the nature that we're talking about. None of it. And so that was really the beginning for me. I spent months inside, just kind of terrified to go outside because I was questioning everything about reality. And after a while, I started to probably 5 6 months later, I started to like get really fascinated with UFOs, and then from then until October of 2021, I was kind of researching Dr. Stephen Greer, what he's been doing with his CE5 protocol, which is, if you're not familiar, if your viewers aren't familiar, it's a method that he uses with small groups of people to contact UFOs or other supernatural life forms. And it's really not anything crazy. It's meditation. It's raising your vibration to match the vibration of these beings so that you're able to communicate with them via telepathy. I think that's really the core idea of it. And so that's what I was practicing for almost a year, maybe a little over a year. And just by myself, I'd meditate, go into these higher states of consciousness, think about calling out to them, but then I would kind of just get held back by fear. And finally, one night, I decided, I was living in LA at the time, I decided in meditation from this higher place of consciousness, like, I can do this, they're here, they want to see me. I didn't really know who they was, but I went outside and walked around my alley for 15 minutes or so, not knowing what was going on, but just kind of like looking around until I finally saw these beings appear at the other end of the alley, which were not physical. They didn't have any physical structure. They were very shadow-like almost like smoke. They had humanoid form, and they were gray with a bit of blue, and it was like a swirl. All three of them were sort of one collection, but I could make out three individual beings. So I approached them, and right before I got probably 15 feet away, I felt this like energy coming towards me. And as I got like foot by foot closer, it was just getting overwhelmingly strong. And I could see right here, like what felt like right here. I didn't know if my eyes were open or closed, but I could see geometric shapes, triangle, square, and then like all these other shapes I'd never seen. And they were like going in like sequential patterns. And as I was seeing them, I was seeing visions of what experiences that felt like other worlds, that felt like the future, that felt like the past, that felt like other dimensions of me. And ultimately, I felt like I could understand what all of it was in the moment, right? Like, it was like someone had plugged in a flash drive to my brain, downloaded this information. But there was no communication, basically. And so I did this for what felt like 15, 20 minutes. And then they disappeared. And I knew the experience was over. But yeah, a lot changed after that. That was a much more positive experience. After that happened, I did not have any fear. Definitely was a new level to my understanding of myself and to what could be possible for reality.
That's like an incredible thing to like listen to happen. What did you change in your life after that happened?
After the second experience, man, I mean, I know we talked about this before, but one of the main messages was actually like that I was in an unhealthy relationship, and that wasn't what they said, but it was sort of shown to me that like it was almost felt, right? Like I felt how unfair the treatment of the relationship I was in had been, and for so long I had sort of been allowing myself to be treated poorly, not just in that relationship either, but they sort of let me know that like that's not necessary, that I can be on my own. And that was a big message for me, not just from that experience, but in my life. Uh, Being able to overcome toxic relationship patterns, the things like our subconscious beliefs that drive us into relationships where we feel unfulfilled or unhappy or are treated poorly or even abused. I think that was like eye-opening for me, and I attribute a large portion of that to them because I actually ended up ending things with my girlfriend at that time, like about a week later, just off intuitive, guidance that I just felt it was the right feeling to do. There had also been some red flags, but as always, we kind of ignore those when we're in love. Getting back to your question though, other takeaways from the experience, I would say, probably another big one, not to get too much into this, was what felt like a feeling of being shown the future or another dimension. I can't really discern which one, but it was California as I had seen it so many times before, on fire and burning, and there was no buildings anymore. Everything was destroyed. I saw this. I saw myself. I saw where I was living. Saw what I was driving, which was a shitty beat up dirt bike to just get around. And I saw a lot of destruction. I saw kind of that whole experience. I saw and felt it, and I don't know if it was meant to be shown to me to show me that that was a possibility for this reality, or if that was a certainty for this reality, or if it was a completely different reality entirely. That was one of the big downloads I got. And the last one, I mean, not the last one probably, but the last one that really lingered with me was that these beings were my family. Um, it didn't really hit me until like as they were leaving. I think they actually came towards me because I felt like I felt them go through instead of going back up because they had come down. Felt like they went through, and when that happened, I had this like overwhelming feeling of love and also of nostalgia of like missing these beings, and I saw like glimmers of like a past with them, but no faces to them, no nothing. It was just like a attachment to the energy. But yeah, I mean those were the main takeaways, and especially that last one, it left me with a feeling of like I was scared the first time, but this time they left me with a reason not to be scared. And maybe they weren't the same beings, but this certainly lets me know that if I continue to walk this path of trying to be someone who can, in fact, interact with aliens and other types of beings, that they are going to support me in that. And that's kind of what I felt was shown to me then. As crazy as that all sounds, it feels like that's what they want to do, is help people. And in order to do that, they need to have we need to be open to their help. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I remember watching a Joe Rogan episode. I don't remember what the guest's name was, but he was some sort of doctor or scientist, and he did a lot of experiments and had a lot of experiences with psychedelics. And I don't remember what he said he took, but to briefly sum up the story, he took either shrooms or some other psychedelic substance with his brother and a friend or something. They had a bonding experience. They went to bed, and he had very vivid dreams of something along the lines of, if I'm remembering correctly, he had like a cabin, like a little house with his research up in like another dream. He was driving, and because of some flood or something, and he had to get his research and then go back. And he got his research in this dream, and he started driving back to go to his actual house or wherever he was going. And he went around the bend, and he saw hundreds of dead cattle, right?
Wow.
And so then he wakes up, and he's like, wow, like I had this like incredibly vivid dream. And then I don't remember the time span. It might have been a week or a month or a few months later, but on the news in real life, they said there was flooding or something like that near
Wow.
where his house was. So he went up, he got his research, just like in the dream, drove back, went around the corner, and in real life, hundreds of dead cattle in the field.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's like my worst nightmare coming true right there. I mean, I just kind of pray some of the stuff because I also have lots of vivid dreams. I always have, and I pray that sometimes that I'm not seeing things that could be future, right? Like I've had to go through dreams of seeing family members die, and like I literally have. It's hard not to hold on to those experiences. I'm sure as your friend realized, because like when you have vivid dreams and have sleep paralysis, like it's very difficult not to remember what you see in those dreams and experiences because it's almost as if your consciousness, um, or maybe part of your subconscious, a part of you was actually there. They dreams in a sense become like a memory, um, at least for me, So yeah, I can't resonate with seeing something actually manifest in reality from a dream. It's never happened to me, but that is crazy. I can't imagine what that would feel like. I would definitely be afraid to dream for a little while. I can tell you that.
100%. So, I mean, you've studied a lot of CIA documents and stuff. I think one of the popular ones, is MK Ultra. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Um, well, for anyone who doesn't know what MK Ultra is, and I don't, you know, if you do know what it is, don't be upset if I butcher this explanation. But generally, it was a program done by the CIA, a research project on human behavior, on how to um, try to modify human behavior, to modify human thinking. Basically, it was a mind control program, if we're being honest, where you probably heard bits and pieces of, as a big research project, there were hundreds of smaller programs underneath it. Um, you probably heard of the ones where they tested, people with LSD. They unwillingly gave test subjects large doses of LSD. Many of them never recovered. Many of them died. Many of them were uh, soldiers with PTSD. Many of them were marginalized groups of people who had been, outcast by society in certain ways. So that's literally just the tip of the iceberg, is that they were testing drugs on people in the 60s and 70s, try to discover if they could, uh, among other things, change people's belief systems, change people's thinking, implant new thoughts into people's minds, much like Inception, actually. That was one of their biggest feats that kind of branched into uh, what became sort of an umbrella project, or not an umbrella project, but a sister project of MK Ultra, which was called Operation Grill Flame. Grill Flame. So both of those were aimed at changing human thinking and controlling minds. But Grill Flame was when they specifically started trying to figure out how to um, introduce new thoughts into people, much like Inception, like in the movie where they try to, it's not that hard to, um, how do you say that? It's not as difficult to make someone believe something, right? But it's more difficult to make someone believe something and have them think it comes from their own origins, right? And then, it doesn't talk much about the way they've applied this in the world and civilians, but I think we can just, use common sense to see, like, if they've accomplished that on one person, on a group of 10, and they're able to do that on a group of millions, it's basically what we've talked about with subliminal messaging, is putting these messages in front of us so that we start to consume them. And then once we've consumed these messages enough, maybe certain frequencies put into music or into movies, then our belief systems will change enough so that we create beliefs that are in line with what the people who put all the information out there want us to believe. And so I think a lot of people struggle to see what's going on, but MK Ultra has been a declassified project for several years now, and was a project for decades, from the 60s to the 90s, and there's a lot of legitimacy behind what they were doing, and that proves that they were successful in a lot of what they were doing in terms of mind control.
Yeah, and that's an insane thing to think about. And going back to like when you were explaining what they were doing, if I remember correctly, I think because I'm getting some of this information from Tom. I apologize, I don't remember what his last name is, but he was
From
on
the
Joe
Joe
Rogan.
Rogan, right?
You can, if anyone is watching, you can find that episode he talked, because he spent years digging into MK Ultra and talking to people who were involved in and all that stuff, and Charles Manson, etc. But like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like they would train. They were targeting hippies at one point, and so they were training CIA operatives to think like a hippie, act like a hippie, all that, right? So they would go undercover and they'd have like a house or a stakeout wherever they were, and they'd also use prostitutes to lure in hippies to go in there, and then they would dose them with the LSD, and then study the effects and everything. And also, I hope I'm not getting this wrong because I'm pretty sure I remember it. But when Tom from when he was on Joe Rogan said that I don't remember the names of any of these people. I'm sure you can find the information somewhere, but um, they tested. I don't remember who this guy was, but the CIA tested the MK Ultra. What I don't know if it was LSD or if they used something else to make him think differently and act differently, but supposedly um, they chose like a target like for him to implant into his mind, and it happened to be like a 4-year-old girl, a 3 or 4 year old girl, whatever, how old she was. She was very young, and the parents were at a restaurant or something, or some sort of bar, and they brought her with them for some reason. And for some reason, they let her wander outside. And so I think the guy who had the stuff implanted in his mind was in there, and then since she was like the target that they implanted into him, he followed her. He kidnapped her, raped her, killed her. And when the police found out it was him, he had zero recollection of anything he did.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think like that's just like that's it's terrifying, but it's also like that's probably just one test that they successfully achieved, right? They could have done that on hundreds of people to just make sure that they were able to do this on different age groups, different people. Like that's new information to me. If it's true, it's very shocking. It's also just it shows what they were capable of. There's also a lot of proof that they were working on um, a number of different mechanisms to brainwash people, right? Not just through subliminal messaging, but through actual a physical device. They had a whole document discussing the shape and size and the material that an object could be used, and where on the human skull a human could be hit in order for that human to not recall being hit and to not recall a certain period of time before being hit. They worked on a project just to figure that out. And they did the same thing for different types of biological agents, like drugs, pharmaceuticals, I mean. Um, so obviously they had all this money, the CIA, to to investigate. Okay, do we want to do this for the physical thing, with the drug, the syringe, with propaganda, or one of 1,000 other ways? Chemtrails, right? Like, my guess is that they've opted to try to maximize the amount of control, right? So if something works, let's do that, and then let's find other ways to control. And at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if they had a lot of tools that appeared to be from Men in Black, just at their disposal to influence people and control people. I wouldn't be surprised if they were successful. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And I mean, I just have to bring it up again. Like, there's definitely gonna be people watching this and like hear all this stuff and be like, "This is like completely crazy. It's fake." But like, it really is a difficult thing to think about and set in that this stuff was actually done by the CIA and this stuff is actually done in real life.
Maybe for some people, I don't know. I at one point I can definitely resonate with that. What it felt like having to really start to accept like because before I knew about aliens or thought aliens existed, I didn't really see the government the way that I see them now, or the economy, or big business. So at this point, nothing surprises me. But yeah, I definitely know. For a lot of people, you start to hear these stories, and you're like, how is this possible? You know. And for me, the answer is always evil, right? Like what this pyramid on my wall is right here. It's who's at the top. It's just evil, right? Like I just believe that evil runs this world, and so a lot of people don't understand why people would have the motives in CIA to create projects like this. And it's like it's not just money. These aren't just programs put together to make more money. They're about control, and control is a slippery slope, and power is a slippery slope. And you know, there's an unsaid kind of existing layer to this, I think, which is religion, right? Like people in positions of authority and power and control, they can become so inflated in their ego that they start to view themselves as above humanity. And I think that's what has happened in a very large way, where those who control this world, the men, the physical people, I don't mean men, I mean men and women and people, but not aliens, right? And not other beings. The human beings that control this world, I believe, are um, very confident that they are not on the same level physically as human beings. They are much higher spiritually. They view themselves as gods, and so um, I don't even remember what your question was, but I think that's what I just continue to come back to is like that's why these things are happening. And there's always going to be two sides. Everything is subjective for anything you discover, but at the same time, like if you know, which I think you should, that everything is coming at the mainstream level is coming from the source of evil, then it's not that hard to use logic to see like, okay, is it a Chinese weather balloon or is this just a distraction from something else? Like, just apply that logic to every situation. And it's like, what are people talking about on the mainstream level? The Chinese weather balloon. So it's a distraction. That's just the way things kind of work in this society. And once you get that, it's kind of easy to start putting the pieces together. And it becomes less scary because it's literally all around you. I hate to say it, but everywhere.
Yeah, and but it's also important. Like I want to note, and I know you do too. That like even though this stuff is like it's negative stuff, like that doesn't mean like your life has to be bad and you have to live every day in fear. You know what I mean? Do you want to expand on that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, that's my roommates always say I'm a hypocrite, right? Because I'm like, part of me is this total cynic who's just like, no, the world's literally fucked. Like it's run by evil reptilians and elites, and they hate us, and you know. But like, that's not me being negative. That's like I'm honestly trying to be realistic, and I am extremely optimistic about life and about experience, right? Like whether this is the one life or not. Like I'm just very optimistic about my own spirit's experience of this eternal infinity of life, right? But I believe everyone lives eternally, right? So that might be why this is easy for me. I definitely don't believe that this is the one life we get. And so it doesn't really freak me out to say, like, oh, we're living this experience in a messed up world because I believe we have to live again. But, for those who don't actually have that belief, what I would say is, like, this stuff is there's no way for you to change a lot of this stuff. It is outside of our control. And so if it stresses you out to think about these things, for me, it brings me a lot of excitement and joy now. I like looking into this. But if it stresses you out, don't consume it and understand what your pace of consumption must be to start to slowly dip your toe into, okay, maybe there's aliens. Okay, maybe the government's not telling the truth. Maybe, there's the earth is flat. Whatever. Just know your pace and go at it. Because if you just dive down the rabbit hole, that might be a good idea for some people. Other people, it might drive you insane. So just be careful. Go at your own pace. It's really hard to answer this question. I won't lie, Brad. Like it's like I feel like I'm very privileged to be in a position where none of this stuff really shocks or scares me anymore. It's very difficult for me to feel like, oh, this is hopeless, just because I've seen that, like, kind of switching topics, but we have the power to create whatever we want in our lives, despite the fact that all these bad things are going on. Like, we still have that power, and the more we step into that power as individuals and as a collective, then the more we will begin to influence this world, and eventually on the mainstream level. So I don't think we need to fight the system. I think we need to talk about it. I think we need to be open about what has happened and what has gone on, but we're not trying to dwell on all the evil that has gone on, and we're not trying to fight back against it even. We're just placing awareness on what has happened so it doesn't happen again, and implementing our own positivity into life and experience so that we can just create anew, right? Just that's kind of my approach. I think that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, and I like what you said about knowing your own pace because for me personally, when I first got into it a few years ago, I took the full leap rabbit hole down into it, and that wasn't necessarily healthy for me because I spent months, researching stuff and looking into stuff, and like that, it consumed me in the sense of like other areas of my life I neglected, and you don't want to do that.
Right.
So I really like what you said about that, and also, I mean, yeah, like we still have the power to, you still have the power to change your life if it's not good. Change those bad habits that you have. Get a new job if you absolutely hate the one you have. It's like
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things that you can control to make your life better. And like what you said about like being in the privileged place of like being able to look at this stuff and have the knowledge and not be that bothered by it anymore. Like I feel in a sense what you feel, and like I'm very grateful for it. And also I also think about the phrase, like ignorance is bliss. Like for people that will never discover this type of stuff, like in a sense it might be better for them because it's like it's a gift and a curse, like you said
Right.
before. Um,
Mm-hmm. I agree with that for sure. And ignorance is bliss is probably the best thing to repeat along this journey because for me, I don't know about for you, when I went down that rabbit hole, all I wanted to do for so long was just get other people to see what I was seeing. And that was part of neglecting, the other responsibilities was like I would go into my workplace, talk to coworkers about conspiracies. And in reality, I was neglecting my work and my stability of that position. So ultimately, like, you know, when you go down that path, you got to recognize that there are tons of people out there who are going to see your perspective and who can have these conversations like we are right now. But it's not the majority. And so you can't be going out trying to convince everybody and their mother. At the end of the day, most people are going to choose to be ignorant or to subconsciously choose to be ignorant, which is really just not choosing. But, um, when you get the opportunity to talk to people about your beliefs, I think that is a fantastic opportunity to talk about them. But that is all I do now. When people ask me about them and what I think about X, I will explain it. But I will never go out of my way to bring up, what it is I'm talking about or believe unless it's asked about. So, yeah, um, and yeah, and it's tough. I feel like it's like everyone goes down that rabbit hole because you just get so fascinated with the overwhelming amount of information there is, like that we just have never been exposed to before. It's all right here on the internet on these computers we have right in front of us, but unless you want to seek it out, it will never find you.
right. And I think something just like spiritual concepts are kind of in that sense of like not everyone's gonna want to listen, but it's like I had that when I first got into everything. Like I wanted to share everything with everyone, and some people would be open to it, but most people would not. But it's always healthy to get to that point where you can study what you want and learn about what you want. And if people ask you about it, you'll be glad to talk about it. But if you don't talk about it with certain people, like you're not hurt by that. Because at a point, like it was like, oh, like I want to talk about it, and like these people won't listen to me. But now it's like, everyone's living different lives, and like, if you want to listen, great. If you don't want to listen, we'll talk about something else. Like that's completely fine.
Right.
And it's good. It's great to reach that point of like peace within yourself.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, that I think just comes too from like this is sort of switching gears a little bit, but it's like kind of going back to what I said earlier on about ego and how society is kind of stuck in this place of ego. It's like we're always looking, not we and not you and me and not everybody's listening, but we being the majority of society is always looking for validation in their beliefs, in their actions. They want to know that what they're thinking and doing is right and is approved by the people that they surround themselves with or the people they view to have value. And that is just, the exact opposite way to go about life because other people, even if you wanted them to define who you were, like they wouldn't be able to. I couldn't have you decide who you think I am and then go tell someone else and get me a job or go, establish credibility for me on a social media page. So if someone can't do that for me in the positive way, why would I let you and your negative beliefs about me affect the way I go and create my life? Like, you know, at the end of the day, I think what I'm trying to say is when you go out there and you try to spread these beliefs that are considered conspiracies or fringe ideas, you're just going to get met with a lot of resistance. And so instead of going that path, I think it's a lot more productive to validate yourself by continuing to learn. And that's what I've tried to do. And the fact of the matter is, like, I've tried to invalidate a lot of these ideas. And in doing so, I've actually proven to myself, like, man, this is hard to disprove. This might actually be true. And the more I do that, the less I feel the need to talk about this stuff because it's like the only reason I ever wanted to talk about these was because I didn't have enough validation from my research. And I just wanted to get other people to agree so that I didn't have to research it anymore. I could just form this new belief I wanted to have. But we have to avoid confirmation bias and our own personal biases at all costs in order to actually discover what the truth is of this universe and of our own, human nature.
Right. I mean, something I think about, I mean, that's just an issue for so many of us on so many different topics and concepts that we believe. It's like we believe one thing, and we're only talking about it so that people can agree with us. And if they don't agree with us, we shut our ears. I don't talk about politics with anyone, and I don't really have that many set beliefs on it because it's like that's a whole nother conversation topic that has to do with the government and the news and stuff. But like just on the simple level of people having the left and the right beliefs, it's like people have their beliefs, they turn on their news channel, and they listen to what they want to hear, that they're listening to, oh yeah, I believe this, and they're saying it, so it's just confirming it. And then if someone from the other side brings up a different concept, a different belief, you yell at them, you curse at them, you're wrong. It's like,
Right. And I mean, my mind takes me in like three different directions, but like, you know, division is created, right? That's why we only have two parties, not 15. And that's why we're still arguing over the same topics that we were arguing over 20 years ago, because they're still working to keep us divided and distracted. But also, and just kind of looking at the way people are so easily prone to just continue consuming what they want and believe. I think that again, it just goes back to subconscious, right? It's like we were taught, most of us were taught growing up a certain religion or a certain atheist viewpoint or a certain political viewpoint or against politics. But whatever we were taught, unless we have actively gone out to try to observe it and objectively just look at it, then it is going to be a result of what our subconscious has been fed. And so a lot of people are out here, unable to reach just the 1% of consciousness they need to even see that they're living entirely in their subconscious. And that's what's keeping, the majority of people on social media debating and fighting about politics. The more that that's the mainstream, the more that can be kept at the mainstream level, but not just kept there, like also made to appear as what is mainstream, right? Like the news is always going to tell us the story of the most division. They're never going to share, like, a growing number of young adults are starting to see that politics need to be completely reshaped. You're never going to see that article title, right? Because they'd much rather say people are divided over this. So it's just, not to get into politics, but it's just like, yeah, people are, I mean, we're being divided, and it's just so easy to see that. But it's also, it's also easy to see that people are just kind of regurgitating the information they consume and consuming the information that their subconscious tells them to. So it's a habit we need to help break people out of. And again, not by waking them up individually, but by just walking in our own truth, being as authentic as we can, and allowing whoever is open and receptive to align with us. I mean, that is literally the only way. There's a great saying, like I don't know how it goes. It's just an idea, and I think you'll understand it very easily. It's like, in this wave, this journey that's happening, there's two sides, and if you are of darkness, right, like you can easily bring people down. It's not hard for someone who's negative to be rude to you, and for you then to respond with negativity. He's on the negative side. He's just brought you into it. But you, as someone on the positive side, you can't go take someone negative and say, be positive and lift them up. It just won't work. And so that is one of the things to be aware of. As you are walking the path to light, there's going to be more and more people. The larger the light, the greater the shadow. There's going to be more people trying to bring you down. And you can't bring them up, but they can bring you down. And so it's just a really tough thing to face. But at the same time, it's like that is that once you know it, there's no arguing with it. That's sort of the fact of it. I think it's almost like energetic law. Can't immediately bring yourself into a high vibration of love. It takes practice. You have to be that person. You have to walk in the shoes of a person who cares and has empathy. But you can take a loving person and make them angry enough to act like they're not themselves. It doesn't work vice versa.
Right. And something I think about is, all these different things that they program into us in the subconscious beliefs. But there's also something that we were taught ever since we got into school at 3, 4 years old is be nice. But so many of us are not nice. And we go throughout our days ignoring each other, making snarky comments, whatever it is. And, it's like if you went up to someone in public and literally you're walking in a mall or something, and then you walk up to someone who's walking the other way, and you go, "Hey, I'm proud of you, man. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day." Like something as simple as that can make someone's day entirely because
Hmm.
nobody talks about positive stuff like that. Nobody like tells each other that they're proud of each other. It's like a foreign concept.
It is, and I mean that's just like my I gotta say like I don't hate anything. I don't use the word hate, but I very strongly dislike the culture of like it's cringy to be kind and it's cringy to like care about life. It's like that is so backwards and it's doing so many of the wrong things and it's like sort of seen in like these podcasts you see so much of where it's like men and women debating about like gender roles and it's like you're not doing anything good in my opinion for society by just like spouting clear like both sides are being sexist. Everyone in that whole community is being sexist and everyone in this whole kindness is culture cringe kindness is cringe culture. Everyone in both of those and much more are just so unattached to their heart chakra, if I'm being honest, but really, in a more real sense, unattached to their emotions, right? They're not able to show love and kindness authentically because they don't receive it enough and they don't actually have that source of that in their own lives. I think it's an energetic law that we are only able to give that which we get, right? And it's the law of like reciprocity or equal exchange. And so it's like there's just too many people out there saying and saying it's stupid to be nice, being mean, joking and hurting people's feelings like it's still middle school, acting like they're cool like it's still middle school, and it's like I think that I can speak from this really from a lot of experience because I was that person. Honestly, I was the person who viewed all that stuff in that way and who was honestly a jerk for a little while in college. But I can say with 100% confidence that that wasn't even me as I know it now. That was my ego, an ego that I have long since been not attached to. I think the main takeaway there is that you know we have an ego and we have a self, and the ego is always going to try to uh, you know find a way to to boost itself up, to gain power, to gain control. So you know once you know that, and then you act as an asshole and a douchebag, and you talk down on other people, it's so hard to realize that you're not the weak one. It's like, why am I bringing people down? So I feel better about myself. Oh, so I'm weak. Then all of a sudden everything changes. It's like kindness is actually strength. Treating people with love who are mean to you is actually power. Like that's that flip of a switch, but it's only power to the self. And if you're still identifying with ego, when you boost other people up and when you say nice compliments to people and you don't get them in return, ego feels lesser then. So, I think that's why people don't want to spread kindness and love is they're actually acting in line with their ego. And like I said, they can't touch their true self. They can't talk to their true self, which starts at their heart and in their intuition and from a place of love, which is where I think a lot of people in this world are going to go into is this new dimension of the true different world because we're able to express emotions and validate them as physical, real things. It's an exciting time, I think, but not everyone can go to this new place,
Yeah.
this world.
I I think it's the goal is to be at peace with yourself so that like whenever someone like insults you or something or says something you don't like about you or someone else that you care about or whatever it is, or I don't want to say someone that you care about, but let's just for yourself, if someone insults you, we're so quick to like start insulting them back and be like, oh, this and that. But if you can like hear what they're saying and then just respond with peace and like still be nice to them, like that's another level of peace that you have within yourself and calmness and gratitude and reassurance in yourself and confidence in yourself that you don't have to receive that energy and then send it back to them. You can send back something else. And most of the time, I mean, someone could either realize that they're doing what they're doing, or I mean, they're not going to feel good about themselves because they're like, this guy's still being nice to me when I'm being an asshole. It's like, what's going on
Yep.
here?
Makes people very uncomfortable, actually. I remember in LA one day, I was riding my scooter. They don't have the lanes on the streets like to ride your scooter in, but they have huge sidewalks that are like 4 times the size of a normal one. So I rode the scooter on the sidewalk. No one on the sidewalk. There's cars going 50 miles an hour. I thought it was probably the right decision. And this guy who works at like a bike shop is like, slow your fucking bike down, or he's like, take your fucking bike off the sidewalk. And he chirps that at me as I ride by. And I, just being in such a positive space, just turn around and I go over to him and I'm like, hey, I was actually wondering this before I got on the bike. Like, am I supposed to ride on this or in the street? He's like, I don't fucking care, man. I'm like, oh, but you just told me like to get off the sidewalk. So is it the street? And like cars are zooming by. He's like, you just almost hit me, bro. Like, you just need to get out of here. And I was like, look, like I just didn't feel it was necessary to curse at me. Like, I just kind of was so nice, and he got super uncomfortable. And ultimately, I think he told me to fuck off. But that was just one of like so many times I've done this where you don't get brought down to people's level. I call it transmutation, and this is just a sneak peek. I'm writing something on this. I believe it is one of the most powerful forms of mind magic that we can do. And mind magic is something I refer to as anytime we're using our mind to to change reality, honestly, to control energy to a certain extent. And it's like transmutation is the fact that when we get energy given to us, which was all the time, you and I are exchanging energy right now, um, probably a very similar frequency range. But when someone at a much lower vibration throws you a bunch of negative energy, most people, literally respond by not only going to that vibration, but by acting in eye to eye. And it's like, that's because they don't know how to transmute. They have taken that energy for what it is at face value. And it's like, kind of like what you said about, when someone says something to you, it's like if someone throws negative energy at you, but you know who you are and like, that those words don't mean anything. This energy doesn't affect me. Then really what they did is they just threw, energy at you. Much like when someone says something to you and they comment on your post, something mean, they're still giving you attention. They're still giving you energy. So it's up to us to transmute it, and we can take that energy very much in that present moment. And I literally do this where I channel it up into my head. I always see my energy moving up my spine into my crown, and you get this sense of like, oh, I just got a boost, and then you can use that to spread love. Which, if you know about the laws of the universe, you energy, when you get more energy and you use it for love, you're going to get love in return. At least the amount you give, probably more. So it's like transmutation is literally one of the most valuable skills, because if you go around society consuming energy, giving out love, and just consuming what people give you, nice or not, but you continue to just be a source of light and love, like you will manifest so much abundance and so much prosperity just by being that channel. You're basically like a I don't know. There's got to be a word for it, right? Like a good
Yeah.
acronym or a good analogy. I'll think of something. But does that all make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Cool.
And I think like we have a choice to be able to act that certain way, even when we think we don't, because there's been times in my life when one negative thing happens to me, like in the morning or something, and then it ruins my entire day. But you don't have to let that thing ruin your
Right.
entire day.
God, it's so. I mean, I love that example because it's so easy to apply. It's like someone cuts you in line at the bagel shop, and then you get angry, and then you hit your car on it's the sequence of events, right? The ripple effect. Like you could continue to come back to the first incident, and so many people do, where they're like, that person who cut me was the source of this problem. They fucked up my day. They fucked up my life. But it's like, no, you are literally always responsible for your reaction. No one is ever responsible for the way you react. You're not responsible for what happens to you. Someone might come into my house and rob me. I can't control that, but I can control how I respond. And that is literally the rule that applies to everything that happens in life. Even things that are incredibly unfair and unjust, we still have to respond to it, from our own consciousness. Otherwise, you know, uh, we'll end up losing control of our lives very quickly, placing blame in a million different places. And that's the craziest part, is when we place blame, we actually forfeit control over the future of our lives, because we're telling present moment, or us and the atoms around us, that we don't have control. we're basically sending that message out, and so reality is going to send us back more situations that make us feel out of control. So yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool, I think, to just be able to recognize that like you're responsible all the time for your reaction, and if no one can phase you, you're basically, I would say that's probably the most powerful you can be, right? Because like even politicians who we view as powerful have egos. But if you don't get upset by someone affecting your ego, you're more powerful than 99% of the world, I would say.
Yeah. And you even notice like if you sit in that negative mindset, you'll notice so many more negative things happening throughout your day. But then vice versa, if you choose to think positive or have one positive experience, or choose to think one thing, one concept positively, the rest of your day, you'll notice that there's so many different things that you notice. Oh, this good thing happened too, and I feel good about this. And all right, this is good. And you know what I do for myself is when I'm in that mood of like, all right, everything's positive right now, and I think to myself, why are so many other days like I'm not this positive? I'm not. I'm like I'm more negative, and I think to myself like, why can't I be like this every day? And then I say to myself, you can. It's your choice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way, right? Like, I think consistency is super difficult for me, for everybody, because it's just not every day. You don't have the same amount of energy every day. Some days you wake up just feeling a little worse. You have a stomach ache or something happened at work, and you just these things like that's life, right? Like it's a wave. It's not a line. Um, but yeah, I mean, I feel like the best way I have found to just continue to try to make myself consistent is not to assign um, so like obviously work, like my job and walking my dog and eating, certain things are stable, but everything else, like all the other time in my day, it's mine. And so I try to like not so much say I need to do this, this, and this. I need to do these three things every day because that type of consistency can be very detrimental to us. If we don't hold up to it, we're just going to feel, defeated. So instead, I just sort of try to focus on what it is I want to accomplish, which is I want to bring myself into higher states of consciousness. That is literally the end goal for me. Spend as much time as I can not thinking and not obsessing and not feeling anxious and not attaching to physical things, but just in a state of consciousness, which I like to call the flow state. So anytime I meditate, anytime I play piano or guitar, anytime I write or read, anytime I work out, dance, beatbox, or freestyle, there's literally a list, right? It goes on and on. All these things. Those are considered being consistent for me. Like, as long as I'm doing something that puts me in a flow state, rather than sitting on my bed and scrolling social media for 2 or 3 hours, then that is productive and that I am making progress. And so that's my philosophy is like, this goal list is merely it's not goals really. It's just things I can spend my time doing that I have decided would provide value. And my end goal is just one thing, to be more conscious. Because from a higher consciousness place, I can spread more love, I can do more good. And so, yeah, I mean, when it comes to consistency, I think it's just, there's no reason to say, I'm going to work out 7 to 8 p.m., every day. I'm going to eat breakfast at 9. I'm going to take a cold shower for 20 minutes. Like, just try to put one foot in front of the other every single day. And don't make the same mistake 2 days in a row. Those are my rules. And other than that, self-forgiveness is key because we're going to make mistakes, but don't make a mistake and then beat yourself up over it because then you just lose twice.
I really like your mindset about that because there's definitely been so many times in my life where I want to get a certain amount of things done. I want to feel like I'm productive enough and I want to do this, and this. And then I miss that one thing and I'm like, fuck man, why didn't I do that? Like it's all right,
Right.
man. Like it's one thing. You have another you have other days. Of course life isn't guaranteed, but it's like chances are it's not something that's like the most important thing in the universe that you have to get done at that exact moment. Um, and there's a lot of like
That's that
creative
standard you set for
outlets.
yourself.
Yeah. And then there's just like a lot of creative outlets and stuff that you want to do, but like sometimes that stuff just like comes at an unknown time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't always take action on it, but like sometimes I'll be laying in bed at night and like that idea will come over at me that like because I think I mean this will shift the conversation topic a little bit, but I think like when you're in that that tired state, like you're a lot more creative and your mind starts to wander to places that it can't when it's like 2, 3 in the afternoon and you're doing whatever you're doing throughout your day.
Definitely. Yeah, man, creativity and like spontaneous ideas always come to me late at night, like in the shower, it's like it's never the best time, right? But I just like, this isn't really what my brand is about. This isn't what TruTalks is about yet, but something I want to branch into a lot is sort of this like motivational, positive self-development, stuff like because I think like the thing that I'm trying to say is that so many people are their own worst enemy, um, where they're like you said, they set their own expectations for their day or for their life or their week or whatever, and then they don't meet them, and then they just like feel like they're not doing enough, or even worse, we, um, compare ourselves to where we're at to other people and where they're at, and it's like it's good to have expectations for yourself, but I genuinely believe that it is never ever productive to spend time uh, harming yourself with thought, right? Like I guess there's a couple exceptions. If you commit a heinous crime or you do something extremely evil, you should have to consider your actions and the results. Like that is the anomaly. What I'm trying to say is that like there's no reason for us to ever say, "Oh, like I didn't do everything I said I was going to do, so I failed or I am not enough." Like that self-talk is the end of the line self-talk. It's, "Oh, how are you going to review your day?" And if you're continuing to not meet your expectations and beat yourself up, that's the habit you're going to create. And so, in that sense, I'm very similar. I don't always hit those expectations for myself every day because I'm often operating in the flow state where I might just start playing piano and end up doing it for an hour. So that's why instead I just shift my, how much my expectation to be, how do I feel about myself? And ultimately, the end result of spending time doing things that bring you into consciousness is happiness. The more they're in your meditate, like it's just it's a it is action reaction. The more you meditate, the more happiness and love you're gonna feel as a result. The more you play piano, the better you're gonna get. The better you get, the more you're gonna feel happy when you play good music. Like that's the way these things work, and it's very much the exact opposite reaction when we overindulge in social media or in entertainment. It takes us farther and farther away from happiness. And I think happiness is just your end goal. It's a very observable result. Like, how do you feel? I don't know. Everyone's different, but that's just kind of the way things work for me.
Well, yeah, no, I think it's important for everyone to have some sort of creative outlet. I mean, for some people, it could just be
Definitely.
journaling or just be whatever it is. But like, I mean, for you, you said sometimes it's music. You know, like I play drums and like, it doesn't always work, but 95% of the time, if like I'm dealing with something or I'm just in a bad mood and I want to try and make myself feel better, I'll get on the set or start playing some music that I like, and I'll get into the zone. It's like everything in reality disappears, and I'm just like I'm in the music, and I'm doing
Yep.
that at that moment, and that's making me happy, and that's all that matters in that moment. And then that can then just lead me to when I'm done with that, like if it's a problem that I had to deal with, like I'm in a more conscious, a more positive mind state, so I can deal with it at that point instead of dealing it before when I was in fear or I was mad or whatever the low energy frequency was. It's now
Definitely.
changed. And
Yeah. I mean that to that point too. It's like I didn't even really consider that not everyone has creative outlets, right? Um, because I have a lot of creative outlets, and I'm a very creative person. But I mean, to that point, like I think humans are creative beings. Everything we do has some inherent creative qualities to it. This conversation is very creative. We're just creating ideas and conversations and thoughts and sentences. So everything is creative, but a lot of us, to your point, don't have creative expression opportunities. We don't work in jobs that allow it, and we haven't learned an instrument, or we don't take time to read books or do these things. And I think, trying to view this from a perspective of not being very fortunate to have been sort of forced into a lot of creative channels. Now that was taught these things all my life in instruments and sports and stuff, it's like I enjoy them. But I think for a lot of people, when you try things, you have to go through that growth process where it's really unenjoyable. Specifically, what I could resonate with on that is meditation. Like, I know that meditating at first, and you get in there and you sit down, you try to really just breathe and clear your mind. It sucks. It's hard. You get uncomfortable. You start getting sweaty, maybe. Like, that is the same process you go through learning an instrument or trying to create a blog or a content channel to express yourself. But I think at the end of the day, like, it is always worth it. Anytime, like you said, you sit down, maybe 99, 95% of the time you sit down to try to creatively express yourself, you might not do it for a long time. It might just be 5 minutes, but you will enter a state of mind that is the opposite of subconscious, where you're not in routine, you're in entire consciousness, where you can't play drums or guitar unless your whole consciousness is on that. You can't be thinking about what's happening later or something stressing you out. So I think that having things like that in your life ultimately are incredibly important, because we must express our creativity. If it's suppressed, I think that is one of the things that will most certainly harm the human spirit, and as a result, the human body. I believe our bodies function in large part in response to the way our mind functions.
And with all that, I think it's going back to kind of a point we made before. It's so important to be proud of yourself, of the progress that you've made, even if it's really small, because it's something. Because we can, especially when you're trying to like improve yourself, the trap that you can get into when you're like starting your self improvement journey is like always feeling like you're not doing enough, and feeling like you have to get all these things done every single day, and even after you get those 10 things done in that day, you still don't feel like it's enough, and you have this need that you have to be productive 24/7. But I mean, it's just like for drums, for example. I mean, if I had to say, like, I've been playing for a few years. For the time I've been playing, I don't think I'm where I should be. But at the same time, I can still look back and say, where I started from to where I am now, I've made a lot of progress. Like, it's just it's just the difference of like one song 2 years ago that I always wished I wanted to play, and I was like, oh, this is so difficult. How am I going to be able to do this? And I can play it now. So it's like I can be proud of myself for that.
Yeah, that's the importance of perspective. I mean, everything in life is perspective, and like we were kind of talking about just a few minutes ago, you can have two perspectives in that situation. You can either have the perspective of how am I doing relative to, or I guess three, how am I doing relative to where I started, which is the healthy way, because as long as you've worked 5 minutes on it, you've improved, and in that case, you should always be proud of yourself. Be proud of yourself for anything you do. Anytime you step forward, you should be proud of yourself. Or you can take the other two methods, which are like, because of, I lost my train of thought there. Other people, right? You can have the perspective of how am I doing relative to other drummers, right? I'm not a famous drummer yet, so I'm not good, and then you can never feel adequate. Or equally as bad, you can hold yourself to the expectations you set that you never. I mean, some people might disagree with this, but I just don't see, unless it's like for your job, it's like a specific milestone, or maybe like financial things. Like, you don't need to like tell yourself, I'm going to be this good at drums in 2 years, otherwise I'm a failure. Like, that's not ever going to serve to help you. It might motivate you, but I would argue there's better motivational methods. So what I'm trying to say is, that's the perspective flip, is like, I'm doing good relative to where I started. And that is the key to life. Like, we're always making progress. Chances are, unless you're laying in bed every single day and facing your pillow and doing nothing, you're actually making progress in a lot of ways you probably don't see. And so we should always be patting ourselves on the back for just getting up and living and trying, because it's not easy.
Definitely, because I mean, the mental health is such a huge important thing nowadays. And we can get so down on just the littlest thing and let it just ball up and not only ruin our day, but ruin our week and our month and our year and our life. And it's important to realize, like, like I used to suffer from depression. Like they diagnosed me with it, and I used to take medication for it. And in that time in my life, like I didn't ever see a way out. I was just sitting in that suffering day after day, week after week, month after month, and I was just like, all right, this is just what life is. I'm just gonna be angry all the time. I'm gonna be sad all the time. I'm never gonna feel like I'm good enough. I'm never gonna feel like I can connect with anything or anyone. And it's, I mean, it's easier to do that nowadays because of like all the stuff. Like if you are, like, let's say if you're just getting to high school or something and you don't have that many friends or something, it's so easy to look at other people and be like, oh, they have more friends than me, or like this person has a relationship and I don't, and then it's so easy nowadays to be like, oh, I'm not good enough because I don't have a girlfriend, or I'm not good enough because I don't have 10 friends. When it's just not true. I mean, in terms of a relationship, you don't need a relationship when you're 13, 14 years old,
Definitely
and
not.
that something like that comes at different times for everyone. In terms of friends, usually you don't even need 10 friends, because if usually when you have I don't want to have people misinterpret that, but usually a lot amount of people doesn't necessarily mean better, because you can have
Right.
15 friends but you can only feel like you can connect with 3 of them. But there's also, you could have, there's nothing wrong with having 3 people that you can connect with and not 10 people that you can just hang around with. You know what I
Right.
mean?
No, yeah, and I think the way you said that was really well put. Because like, I've had a group of 15, 20 guys that I was close with every single one of them, and then I've had a group of 15, 20 guys where I was only close to two or three, and we all hung out every day, and it was sort of this like unnecessary thing. So it's definitely very subjective, and it changes. But I definitely very much agree that like it's never necessary to be measuring ourselves up against others, and I think it's really hard, um, for teenagers and people who are going into college, because I remember what it feels like to think you know everything and to think that you are like an adult and that you know how the world works and that like you know what life has to offer. But like as I'm 25 now, I remember thinking that when I was 15, when I was 17, when I was 19, when I was 21, when I was 23. And I don't even, and now I'm at 25 and I'm like, nope, I'm not going to think that anymore because I've always been wrong. Life has always shown me that I don't know shit, that I'm not ready to consider myself done, right? Like, so I think like that's really, it's tough for me to tell people in those age groups, like, doesn't matter. Everything that's happening right now doesn't matter, because it does. It matters to them, and what happens matters. And um, I think rather it's important for the people to know that like there's always, 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 no matter what age you are, indefinitely before you're 35, 40. Like if you're younger than 20, you literally will never, you can continue to start over, right? You can make a mistake, you can start over. You can not have friends, go move somewhere else, make friends. You can move there, make a mistake, move somewhere else, start over, lose a job. Like, so it's just, I don't know. I have younger sisters, and I watch them get caught up um, sometimes in what's happening, much like I have. And then I hear the stories and realize, wow, I went through the same thing, and I remember how much I felt like that. And I'm the oldest, so I never had someone to talk about. And I would go crazy, and but now I'm really trying to show them, like, look, it doesn't not matter. Like, everything matters, but at the end of the day, like, you need to start viewing things from, you need to just zoom out. You need to be able to perspective flip. And I think that's sort of the overall point that's kind of tying everything we've been saying together, is like the skill to be able to change your perspective of a situation, especially an emotionally charged situation where you might be prone to respond from uh, your subconscious. Then all that's really needed there is more consciousness. The more we can place consciousness on situations, especially ones that are emotionally heavy, then the stronger we'll become. And I guess that's what I always kind of try to tell my sisters and other people, is that like, it sounds cheesy, but I promise you, take a deep breath, go outside, smell the air, listen to the wind blow. Like, those things, as cheesy and cringe as they are, like, they make the biggest difference for me. Um, because there's a fine line between who you really are, your positive response, and between me getting angry and stooping down to that level of someone, and it's merely just consciousness. And how much time it takes to put consciousness there might differ for everyone. I might need 30 minutes to calm down. You might need 5. But if we don't do that, if we don't make a habit of placing consciousness before we act, then we become controlled by our subconscious, and our actions are not really those of who we really are, you know?
Right. And then your mind and your emotions will use you instead of you being able to use them.
Hmm.
I think that's like an important distinction to make because we often let our mind run our life and we don't really realize that we aren't necessarily our mind. Like there's something deeper than just our mind being us because it's like I think a lot of what we think of as our mind is us is actually our ego.
Right. And our thoughts too. I mean, I think what you were saying earlier, I also suffered, not with diagnosed depression, but I had um, a very serious, I would say, like overthinking problem where I'd wake up and I just have voices all across my head, bing, 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 and I feel like I could never even figure out like which one was me. Like I was just constantly suffering with this like kind of identity crisis, feeling very, very overwhelmed, very unhappy, and it was almost like a flip of a switch moment for me, but it also came through practice. But when I really realized like you are not your thoughts, like that, it's a really profound idea because it's like what you just said, like none of what's happening in the mind is actually fundamentally you. Like it's part of you, maybe it is definitely involved in your experience of existence, but who you are is actually, if you are able to take a second and zoom out, your consciousness can observe the thinking mind. So then, who's that consciousness? And that consciousness is actually, I think, just the tip of the iceberg to who we really are. Because who we really are is probably some powerful, energetic being that exists in the chakra system and that we haven't learned to fully express yet. But that is the tip of it, right? It's just consciousness. And the more conscious we can become as individuals and as a planet, the more we will be able to create reality, which is the goal. That's why I think we're all here, is to figure out how to create, how to be creators. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could go on for hours about this stuff. I do have to hop off soon, Bradley. So
Yeah.
you got
I
any
w
closing out topics for us or
yeah,
anything you
no,
wanted to
no,
cover?
no. I really appreciate you coming on, Truman. It's been a great conversation.
Dude, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, man. So much fun. We definitely have a lot of similar ideas. I'd love to talk more. Dude, keep up the work with the podcast. I've been watching them, and I really enjoy what you're doing. I think you're spreading a really important message, um, which is that everyone has a voice, and you know, in doing that, you're also spreading a lot of other powerful messages, which come through the voice of other people and through your own. But yeah, thanks for having me, dude. If you ever want me back, I'll be here, and I look forward to seeing this out
Hey,
live.
I'd love to.
All right, I'm gonna head
Well,
out, but
thanks
thanks
for
for having
tuning in,
me.
guys. We'll catch you in the next one. See ya.
Adios.